Musashi Samurai Legend brings Square Enix's crazy-haired samurai back for more sword-swinging action. Along with a new look, there were several changes made to the gameplay that ultimately helped it improve over its predecessor. The story this time around sees the player on a quest to acquire 5 elemental swords that are scattered throughout the world, and you start out being summoned by a princess, but in the process she gets kidnapped and the story takes on from there. Musashi charges into battle with 2 weapons, a basic katana and one of a selection of larger blades that you collect as you continue on with the adventure. It all takes place in real time and allows you to strike the enemy with the katana for a short combo, using one of the bigger blades for either a slow finisher or any of the number of special moves. And this is where the game gets interesting, as in order to learn new skills they must be taken from the enemy. By blocking and using the focus mechanic, the color of your lock-on will change, indicating that a special move can be learned. Once your focus gauge is full, you'll have to hit the square button just as your foe uses the ability on you, and then you'll perform another button action to master the technique. It may sound complicated at first, but after some time with the game you'll be grabbing new techniques right, left and center. Of course, when focusing on enemies it leaves you completely open for attack, and creates a constant juggle between taking a risk or playing it safe, which adds a nice amount of strategy to each and every encounter you'll be getting into. Seeing it in motion looks incredible, even to this day, and with a solid 60 frames per second backing it up, the game always keeps up with the on-screen action. Those looking for a well-crafted action RPG that's easy to jump into and enjoy, Musashi Samurai Legend would make for a solid option. Shining Tears is an RPG that harkens back to the games of old. The story is simple but well presented and revolves around the boy who has lost his memories and is found barely alive by a girl. He possesses 2 incredibly powerful rings known as twin dragons, but has no memory of how he got them. It's not long until you're pulled into a conflict that's engulfed the entire kingdom and are prompted to build a band of heroes in order to bring it to an end. The game is presented from a semi-overhead perspective and lets the player wander around a diverse set of towns and dungeons with ease. Upon entering battle, you get the choice of choosing a partner to take with you, which can really affect how each of them plays out. This is all tied to the 2 rings I mentioned earlier, as they grant their wearers great powers, but they also can ultimately corrupt them. Each of your companions have either a light or dark soul, and when you enter combat, you assume the opposite persona in a sort of yin and yang relationship. You become a bloodthirsty jerk when paired with a light soul, and a calm, capable warrior when paired with a dark one. You have your own selection of skills to bring to the table, and you can also link with your partner to perform special attacks. Anyone who has played the Shining Soul games for the Game Boy Advance will be instantly familiar with this system. It's a game that excels most with its hack and slash gameplay and its beautifully stylized visuals. Unfortunately, it has some pitfalls that cannot be overlooked, like its mundane dialogue and cliche story, but if you're fond of RPGs which are much simpler, Shining Tears has a distinct charm that cannot be overlooked. MS Saga: A New Dawn brings together the world of Gundam and RPGs to create what is perhaps one of the best games to come out of the franchise. You play as a young man who was raised in an orphanage and happened to see a team of mobile suits destroy it and everyone inside just as you were leaving. You band together with the only survivor from the explosion and vow to find the black mobile suit responsible for the attack. The game is pretty basic as far as modern RPGs go, and sees you fighting in mobile suits with a number of weapons whilst taking turns dealing out damage until somebody falls. You can use melee weapons, which usually do more damage but give the enemy a chance to retaliate, or you can use ranged weapons which use up more energy but don't give the enemy a chance to counter. As with most RPGs, winning earns experience points and money, which can in turn be used on upgrading your mech or acquiring a series of items and equipment that make your struggle through the world all the more manageable. The more interesting part of the game is that your mobile suit is only restricted by the parts you have and the core units you own. As you progress, you will come across data and special units of material needed to make a basic mobile suit. Once you have the basic suit, you can swap out the arms, legs and shoulder armor with other units, allowing for great customization. As I've mentioned, the suits can be upgraded to add extra HP, attack power or speed, as well as several cosmetic changes that allows the player to add a personal touch to each of the suits you'll acquire throughout the game. It's not all sunshine and rainbows, however, as the difficulty of the game has a tendency to severely spike during boss encounters, and for players who fail to prepare accordingly, it's going to be a bit of a struggle. If you're looking for an old-fashioned RPG, then this is a great choice. The difficulty and design layout can be downers, but with some patience, you can easily get past those hurdles and enjoy what is truly a great game. The PlayStation 2 was home to a huge amount of RPGs that pushed the genre forward in meaningful ways, but as a result a lot of them went on to be forgotten. Orphan's Scion of Sorcery was one of them, and was a rather different take at the time that saw you playing the role of orphan, and after the promise of a trip to an island for some easy money goes south, you find yourself washed up on a mysterious land along with your companions. The combat system is refreshingly original. There are 4 basic attack types: elemental spells, projectiles, defensive magic, and close range attacks. Each type has its own strengths and weaknesses. For instance, while elemental spells tend to hit multiple creatures in a larger range than projectiles, they do far less damage. Defensive magic has to actually be timed so that it's being cast as soon as the attack hits you, adding some need for reflexes into the mix. Close range attacks can even be extended into combos with insane levels of button inputs. Since the battles take place in real-time 3D arenas, timing your attacks so that the enemy will move right in place at the right time is essential. You can even dodge out of the way of attacks by using the close range combat, which is probably one of the most entertaining parts of the gameplay. Obviously, as a PS2 game, the graphics are decent, but not mind-blowing. While in battle, the visuals boast nicely detailed polygonal characters, and level design is big and somewhat detailed. Depending on what you're looking for, you may or may not enjoy Orphan. If you want a long, compelling story with lots of action and adventure, then you're not going to find that here. However, if you enjoy cheesy dialogue, great battles, and a decent amount of challenge, then you've found your game. Digital Devil Saga 2 is a direct sequel to the first game and picks up almost right where it left off. Atlus did a great job at rewarding those who played the first entry, as the story has a much bigger impact on the player if they've gone through it. I don't want to go into too much detail about it, as this was personally one of my favourite aspects of the game, and I truly believe that it's best to not know anything going in, but if you can, make sure you give the first game a go first like I've mentioned. Now, anyone who's familiar with the Shin Megami Tensei series will instantly get along with the gameplay. All of the battles play out in a turn-based fashion and afford the player an absolute buttload of abilities and special attacks that differ from one character to the next. You'll be able to use 3 of them in any one battle, with the goal being to destroy the enemies with the skills that you've taught them. You get a turn for each party member, but can build upon it with critical hits and weaknesses that allow you to quickly follow up with further damage. But the beauty of the system is that the enemies also have this ability, which makes for some rather strategic encounters that are bound to test even the most proficient of RPG players. The leveling system in the game is the same as almost any turn-based RPG, and gain experience until you reach the next level, which will allow you to increase your stats and develop your characters. In terms of customization, there's not that much on offer when it comes to how you can distribute your stat points. To supplement this is the Karma Ring system, which allows the player to boost the stats of their character or provide useful sub-abilities as well. The rings themselves can also be modded with gems you'll find scattered throughout the world, and the best thing about it is that there's a noticeable difference once you've made a change to how proficient you'll become in battle. There are tons of extras in the game, which really adds to the overall replay value of the adventure. There's also many optional bosses who are challenging to beat and add a lot to the main game. If you want a great and unique RPG, I suggest you buy this one. Growing up, I spent a lot of time playing Secret of Mana on the Super Nintendo, which would go on to become one of my favourite games of all time. So the news that the series was going to be making the jump to 3D was like music to my ears. Unfortunately, it didn't turn out as well as many people hoped, but for everything the game gets wrong, it continually provides another reason to love it. You take up the fight as Keldrick and set out to save your childhood friend from the forces of evil terrorising the land. Keldrick is equipped with one sword that has many different functions. Besides the very basic combo string that you use to destroy enemies, the blade can turn into a whip and be used as a slingshot to down your foes. With the whip function, Keldrick can grab onto any object or environmental piece in the game and smash it into enemies to cause what is called a state of panic. During this phase, enemies are inactive and run around helplessly as their panic timer reduces. The more objects you throw at an enemy, the longer they stay in this panic state. Keldrick can also swing enemies into one another, lava to ignite this state of panic if there are no nearby environmental objects to do so. So it all sounds pretty good at this point, right? Well, here is where most people get turned off. The stats you receive from putting enemies into a state of panic are temporary. This means at the start of the next chapter, your character is reduced to level 1 and is stripped of everything. The decision was supposed to make the game feel fresh and different each time you replay or reach a new chapter, and while this is an understandable idea, it just doesn't really work for the rest of the game. The game doesn't really feel or play like any other mana game besides having a similar art style and great music. It definitely isn't the worst RPG out there, nor is it the best. Tales of Legendia starts with two characters named Sanal and Shirley approaching a large ship which is frequently mistaken for an island known as the Legacy. In true RPG fashion, it's not long until Shirley manages to get herself kidnapped, which spurs on the events of the game, and sees Sanal searching the land in the hopes of finding her and bringing her home. Legendia's battle system is more or less a double-edged sword. First of all, one thing that needs to be pointed out to people who have played the likes of Symphonia and are looking to give this one a go is that the systems are entirely different. Symphonia took advantage of fully 3D battle spaces, but Legendia takes it back to the series' roots and presents combat on a 2D plane. As far as actual battle goes, everything is pretty much unchanged. You can use up to 4 characters at any given time, as well as assign skills to a certain button and execute them by inputting various commands with the D-pad. While the game is action based on a 2D feel, allowing you to run at your enemies and beat the daylights out of them, it still manages to retain a decent level of challenge. Visually, Tales of Legendia is a great addition to the series, with each and every character receiving the same love and care when it comes to detail. Every battle plays out in a fluid and smooth manner, allowing the impressive abilities to shine once the action heats up. Tales fans need to know what they're in for here. This is not a full-fledged entry into the series. It's more of a spin-off than anything, made by completely different developers and with a significantly lower budget. Go in knowing that though, and you'll be pleasantly surprised by the game's great plot, intelligent writing, intriguing locations, and fun gameplay. Starting out life way back in 1995, Ark the Lad has consistently provided an RPG like no other, and Twilight of the Spirits on the PlayStation 2 was no exception. Now, the most important aspect of any RPG is its story, and thankfully this game more than delivers, with a grand tale that spans to the absolute edges of the kingdom. The game has 2 main characters, Karg, a young man raised by a prince in a warm, loving environment, and then there is Dark, a half-human, half-Deimos outcast. The battle system is extremely simple. You have a wide area that your character can move around in, and then you can attack any enemy that is nearby, depending on the range of your weapon. There are no job classes or anything in the game, so characters are limited to only one weapon they use for the entire adventure, where you can equip up to 3 pieces of equipment to spice up that weapon, and 3 pieces of armor as well. The other addition to the battle system are the magic abilities you can carry out. This one's simple as well. You gain not only experience, but ability points when you attack enemies. You can spend those ability points to learn new skills or special moves, which can really help out in tight situations, especially the boss fights, which are a true highlight of the game. Now, although Twilight of the Spirits may not deliver in terms of gameplay, its enriching storyline and flawless visuals make up for it. There are many different environments you'll be exploring, and this variety is afforded to each and every character you meet along the way as well. They are each extremely detailed, from the enemies to NPCs, which helps them all feel like a believable part of the world as they seamlessly fit so well within it. And in that regard, it can stand shoulder to shoulder with its contemporaries. If you can find it on the cheap, this one is well worth picking up. If I had to describe Steambot Chronicles in one word, it would have to be ambition. It's one of those games that harkens back to the time when developers weren't afraid to take risks, and although it does miss the mark in some aspects, it definitely hits more than it misses. You take on the role of Vanilla, a young man that finds himself stricken by amnesia, which feeds into the first impressive aspect of the game. You get to shape Vanilla in any way you see fit. You can be greedy, sarcastic, or perhaps a gentleman or a selfless hero, with the NPCs naturally reacting to your choices on the fly. It creates an interesting dynamic between the player and the several characters that occupy the surprisingly large city. Traversing the space is made easier through the use of your Trotmobile, a sort of robotic mech that serves as a means to combat the several enemies in the game, as well as making your way about. The best thing about them is that they are fully customizable, with several weapons, pieces of armor, as well as cosmetics that allow you to add a personal touch. The basic combat system involves battling with these machines. Controlling it will take a little getting used to for some, as it requires the use of both analog sticks at the same time. What truly sets Steambot Chronicles apart from other RPGs though is simply the sheer amount of activities the player can get stuck into, the most notable being the rhythm or dance style minigames that litter the adventure. When doing so, the prompts slowly appear on the screen as the song plays out. It's a really neat inclusion and adds a nice touch to the overall vibe of the city you're living in. Overall, it's wonderful visuals, entertaining gameplay, and a rather original story with plenty of twists and turns make Steambot Chronicles one of the most unique RPGs you'll ever play. Legaia 2 Dual Saga is the sequel to the cult classic Legend of Legaia on the PlayStation 1. Its great story, memorable characters, and unique battle systems cemented it as one of the console's greatest games it ever received. The sequel, on the other hand, was a bit of a mixed bag, and for everything that it got right, there were several aspects that were harder to overlook. You start off as a young teenage boy named Lang. Along the way, you'll meet a lovable cast of characters and NPCs that add a real weight to the world they inhabit. Now, the standout feature of the game, much like its predecessor, is the gameplay. The Legaia series utilizes a system known as TAS, or Tactical Arts System. With this, you enter commands on the D-pad, or analog stick, to make certain combos. If you enter a successful combination, you do a special move that deals more damage than a regular hit. It may seem easy at first, but as you progress, the enemies themselves will become extremely difficult, and that's not even mentioning the bosses, which demand a real understanding of the mechanics in play to overcome. The combat itself can get slightly repetitive if I'm being honest, and the frequency of random encounters will no doubt get on your tits, but it's nothing that completely takes away from what on the whole is one hell of an RPG. Visually, Legaia 2 is certainly a looker, and takes full advantage of the power of the PlayStation 2 to realize its world. This is no more apparent than when in battle, with each move looking just as flashy as the last, which is all held together with a surprisingly solid frame rate. On the whole, it doesn't manage to reach the same heights as the first game, but it still presents a solid adventure that any fan of the genre is likely to enjoy. So if you've exhausted the usual suspects when it comes to RPGs on the PlayStation 2, Dual Saga would make for a solid option if you're looking for a new game to jump into. Well, that does it for today's video. Keep an eye out for part 3 as that will be coming up soon, so don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell to get notified about new videos, which release every Monday, Thursday and Saturday. You can follow me on all of the socials, which are linked below to stay up to date, and also join my growing community on Discord to meet many like-minded gamers to continue the conversation with. I'd like to give a special shout out to my Patreon supporters Rhino, Skill Jim, Shuden, Richard, Amy, Daniel, Paul, Dio, Omar, Strider, Pierre, Carl, Awesome Jacket Dude, GameCube Galaxy and Paddy J for their continued support that helps make these videos possible. If you're interested in joining my Discord or supporting the channel through Patreon, you'll find all of these links down below. As always, thanks for taking the time to watch the video. I'll catch you next time.